The reality is like you don't need to take a picture of everything. You don't need to document everything. You don't need to proclaim and profess to the world that you read a book to your daughter tonight before bed. Just do it. Let's spend less time focused on impressing other people and convincing other people that we're moral and good and righteous, and instead be those kind of men who are deeply engaged with our wife, with our children, our significant others, other extended family members, and then of course it moves into community members as well. Does the elderly woman who's a widow need her lawn mowed next door? Well, then you should do that. You are the person who should do that. Man, if you're anything like me, you can obviously recognize that there are so many significant challenges in society today. Ultimately, we're seeing a destruction and a degradation of cultural norms and traditions that have served us well throughout human history. And yet we have these pervasive and destructive ideologies that are threatening our way of life. And ultimately, we will not only reap the consequences of these ideologies, but our children will as well. It's very frustrating because at times we think to ourselves, what can one man do when we see society and culture being eroded around us? Well, the answer is not to focus on the macro, but to focus on the micro. Focusing on yourself, your family, your friends, colleagues, coworkers, and communities is going to pay large dividends, and it helps you have the maximum impact that you can. For the overwhelming majority of us, we can't have these huge social media followings that will impact millions and tens and hundreds of millions of people, but you can have a conversation with your daughter tonight. You can coach your son's team. You can encourage your neighbor to live a better life. You can train your colleague or your coworker to improve their financial awareness and financial prosperity and abundance. And yet it's hard because we think that in order to be the men that we want to be, we need to impact the most amount of people possible. And while that's not entirely true, I would suggest that if we can go deep and we can really serve those smaller circles who we have an immense ability to serve and to lead and to train and to coach and to inspire, that's going to be significantly better than focusing on everybody, but not really getting any sort of impact with those individuals. Now, guys, I'm going to talk about some strategies for you. Before I do, I want to mention that we have our store is not only hasn't been open, but I know it's been low on supply. We've got a huge inventory that just came in over the past several weeks. So we've got, I think 8 or 9 shirts that have been completely restocked, 2 new shirt designs. We've got new hats, including this one that I'm wearing right here, the Classic Curve, and I believe 5 different color iterations and some other hats available to you. So if you want to support what we're doing here, which is to reclaim and restore masculinity, you can do that by going to store.orderofman.com and picking up your merchandise. I think I have the Be Unreasonable shirt on today. Picking up your merchandise, looking good in the process, letting people know what you're about, and then also supporting what we're doing here so we can continue to do it in large and big ways. All right, guys, with that said, let me talk a little bit about society being lost. Again, as I said in the opener, we know, you can recognize it, you acknowledge it. You see people who are depressed and anxious and suicidal. You see trans ideology permeating every fabric of society. You see the degradation and destruction of institutions that we once held dear, like church, for example, and even community programs that were designed specifically for boys and men. You see the rise in drugs and the epidemic of male loneliness, also the violence that continues to increase, lawlessness, a complete disregard for the American way of life, open borders. I mean, you name it, we can discuss it, we can talk about it, we can complain about it, and we can be frustrated about it. And we should. We ought to be frustrated about those things. But ultimately, there is so much beyond our control that it becomes not a sense of hope and optimism, but a sense of frustration and even contention, because we acknowledge the challenges and the issues that we see around us, and yet we feel like our hands are tied behind our backs, unable to do anything about it. What I would suggest in those cases is to not so so much worry about society being lost, but worry about building your own society in the micro. And how do you do that? Well, at the smallest unit possible. Number one, it starts with yourself. I know that when I'm not doing what I know I ought to be doing, what I should be doing to work towards my goals, that I become more frustrated with external circumstances, things outside of my control. But when I'm doing the right things and I'm focused on myself, there's a lot more hope and optimism, and I'm better able to serve the people around me. So what I would suggest to you, and I wrote some things down here, these are not new things to you, but I really want you to take these 10 or so things to heart and ask yourself, maybe on a scale from 1 to 10, where you stand with each one of these things and how you can get better in each one of these areas. Number one, exercise. Are you exercising every single day? A lot of the times we want to focus on what everybody else is doing, but we're not asking ourselves what we're doing. Do you have extra 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 pounds that you can get rid of? And can you exercise? Go train to the gym. Go for a walk. Go for a hike. Do jujitsu. We all know what exercise is. Be active. Be moving. Even if you're stuck in an office like I am most of the time behind my desk and computer, I can still get down and I can crank out 20 push-ups between podcast guests or between a dozen or so emails that I send out. I have these TRX bands that I can throw in my door jamb, and I can do different shoulder movements, ab movements, chest workouts, lunges, different things that I can do because I have these bands available to me. This is not rocket science, and it's not hard. It's very simple. You just have to be willing to do it. And acknowledging that if you want to improve society, then it starts with the lowest common denominator for all of us, which is ourselves. Number two, diet. Are you eating junk food? Are you eating donuts? Are you eating processed sugars? Are you eating or drinking too much soda? Are you consuming way too much alcohol or doing other irreparable damage to your body by vaping or smoking or other drugs that you may ingest into your body? Guys, get your diet on lock. I'm not going to say that I'm the epitome of health when it comes to my diet, but I know that when I don't eat properly and correctly, and there's even certain foods that I've identified for me that don't agree with my body, I'm sluggish, I'm tired, I'm ineffective, I lose energy, and I'm not nearly as focused as I can be on myself and the people around me. Next, read. I've got a stack of books over there. Now, I have the luxury of having this podcast, so I have guests that I need to prepare for that have written books, and so I've always got a stack of books that I can read from. But guys, go to your library, go to Barnes & Noble. Like whatever you need to do to get books in your hand, even if you have to listen to them on your commute, that's fine. I don't think that's as advantageous as actually reading a book. But if you have to listen to it on 2 times speed to get through it and crank it out on your commute because you have an hour commute each way, by all means, whatever you can do to acquire new information. Next, sleep. This one's overlooked, especially in the self-help development world. So many of us are thinking to the things like, I can sleep when I'm dead and I don't need sleep. And we pride ourselves on not needing as much sleep as our bodies probably ought to have. This is a hard one for me personally, but I know that when I go to bed on time and I have set up my bedroom conducive to getting a good night's rest, meaning no lights, completely black, sound is where I want it to be, temperature is where I want it to be, distraction free, I wake up re-energized, rejuvenated, ready to take on the world and do what I need to do. Next, what are your hobbies? What activities and interests are you participating in? Not for work, not for making money, not things necessarily even with your family. All of those things are important, but what are you doing for yourself? How do you re-energize? Is it going for a hike? Is it going on a hunt occasionally with some buddies? Is it doing painting or photography? What do you find joy and value in that you're not necessarily making money from? You just do it because of the inherent value and joy that it brings into your life. Also, meditate. And I would say these next 3 or 4 fall into the same category, but meditating, journaling, reading scriptures, and praying. This is all a level of self-reflection. This is all tapping us into a power beyond ourselves, a greater power that can give us some context in the way in which we're supposed to show up in life. But meditating, silence, quiet, turning the phone off, not having your kids bounce all over you or your wife asking you to do projects around the house, but just pure quietness, journaling, reflecting about your day, thinking about what you did, thinking about what you didn't do, thinking about how you'd like to improve and get better, Reading scriptures gives us a framework for the way in which we're meant to operate. These words are thousands of years old, and they're those words canon because they work and they're valuable, even from purely a secular standpoint. If you adhere to the principles taught in the Bible, for example, you are going to live a better life. We can extrapolate the religious and spiritual context of it. If you live by those precepts, you're going to have a better life. It's going to be more profitable, more fulfilling, more rewarding, more enjoyable, and you're going to help more people along the way. And then, of course, praying, right? Tapping into God, tapping into his infinite wisdom and his power, and allowing yourself to get to know him so that you can have some context in the way in which you're supposed to show up in life. Next, skill building. For a man, I think this is so crucial that we constantly work on developing and building skills. As John Eldredge says in his book, Wild at Heart, he talks about the man's need to answer the question, am I enough? And we can't answer that question in the affirmative unless we're willing to develop and build new skills that move the needle. Learn how to communicate, learn how to ask for promotion. Whatever type of work you do, get the degrees, the credentials, the whatever you need to be able to excel in those areas. Learn how to network with other people, learn how to make money, learn how to leverage your time, learn how to delegate. All of these things are powerful, powerful leveraging tools for you to impact your own personal society, not necessarily the society as a whole. And by the way, as we think about trying to serve the greater good and society changing, that we can't ignore the fact that the most powerful thing that we can do is to have millions, tens, if not hundreds of millions of men focusing on themselves and their families and their friends. Imagine if we did that. Imagine if instead of trying to go so broad and trying to save other people and rescue other people, we focused on fixing ourselves and those people around us, but there was tens, if not hundreds of millions of men doing that. That's what's going to move the needle. And yet we're focused on the macro when we should be focused on the micro. Guys, next from there, we're talking about dealing with yourself. From there, you want to start working with your family, right? You've got a family, you've got a wife, you've got children, you've got extended family. You should take care of those people. Somewhere along the way, we decided that we're going to just completely erode and decimate the family unit as an integral part of a thriving society. And then we replaced it with Big Daddy government, right? The problem is that now everybody almost expects that the government come in to rescue them from their problems. Well, that's not really the way it's ever worked. Throughout human history, when an individual of the community or of the family had a problem, the family was to take care of it. The people closest to that individual were to take care of it. And it's your job as a patriarch within your household to ensure that you have the means necessary to take care of not only yourself, but the people around you. Guys, if you can't take a little time off in the evenings to coach your son's baseball team or run your daughter to dance practice occasionally, there's a malfunction in the way that you're living. Now, that's not to say that you should be able to do that immediately today, but you ought to be working towards that. Damn, you spend an inanimate amount of time focused on serving your clients and strangers and your boss, and yet we never consider that maybe the best thing that we can do with our time is to go coach that little league team, or to wake up early and go work out with your son or daughter, or to spend a little time reading to them at night. I know it doesn't feel as great in your life because nobody's going to see that on this stupid little device that we call our phones and social media. You know, you often hear the adage, if there's no pics, it didn't happen. Well, it's funny, it's cute, it's clever, but the reality is like you don't need to take a picture of everything. You don't need to document everything. You don't need to proclaim and profess to the world that you read a book to your daughter tonight before bed. Just do it. Let's spend less time focused on impressing other people and convincing other people that we're moral and good and righteous, and instead be those kind of men who are deeply engaged with our wife, with our children, our significant others, other extended family members, and then, of course, it moves into community members as well. Does the elderly woman who's a widow need her lawn mowed next door? Well, then you should do that. You are the person who should do that. You know, you see these pictures often where there's two lawns, for example, right next to each other, butted up, and there's no fence in between neighbors. And you'll see a neighbor who will literally mow his own lawn, and they'll create a line because they won't mow into their neighbor's yard. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, there's some context behind that, but don't be that kind of neighbor. Or the one I often get a kick out of is the flight of stairs, you know, from the front door down, it's 5, 6, 7 steps. And you can see that there's some snow. And on half of that step, it's only about 3 feet wide. So about 1.5 feet of shoveled snow. Just shovel the whole stair, okay? Like, serve your family. Serve your community. Help people where they need to be helped. Look for problems. One thing I really actually enjoyed when I was going through harsh Maine winters is my son and I would get in the snow plow, and I would plow my driveway, and we would get in the plow and we would drive around and we'd see if there was anybody who needed help. And sometimes we'd see people out there with their shovels in their hand pushing snow off their driveway, and we would just pull up and say, hey, can we just plow this real quick for you with the plow I have on my truck? Man, they were so grateful. And it was such a good time between my son and I. We'd go do that. We'd help 6 people out, and then we'd go get a drink, and then we'd head home. Took us a couple of hours, maybe every Saturday morning or something like that. But it was such a fun thing to do. And it was such a great way to give back to the community and serve the people who are under my care. If I'm a neighbor in that community, those people are under my care. Imagine that. Imagine if instead of asking the president to do something to save all of us and fix all of our problems, we just decided to save ourselves, to serve ourselves, to lead other people, to communicate effectively with our neighbors, to get to know your neighbors, for crying out loud, to understand what they're going through and what they're dealing with, and be excited when their kids graduate high school or college and go to their kids' games and have barbecues and play together and go on dates with your significant other and their significant other and just get to know each other and serve and lead and guide and coach and help. And this is how we're meant to do it. We've become so large as a society and so connected through, again, these little devices that we have such a difficult time connecting with the person right next door to you. The person that could possibly make a huge and tremendous impact in your life because you're worried about the stranger who lives in Bangladesh who you've never met and trying to impress that person. Let's focus on the people next to us. So we've got ourselves, we've got our family, we've got our friends, and now we can move into the realm of helping our colleagues and coworkers. Guys, how much time per day do you spend going into the office, spending time with your colleagues and coworkers? Even on a lunch break, you're spending time with those individuals. Man, stop with the competition, stop with the gossiping and the undermining and the just the toxicity that comes with so many work environments. Man, be that guy, the guy who goes out and leads, the guy who serves, the guys who offer time and his resources and his energy, who has an abundance mentality, who isn't afraid that just because he helps Joe get something that he wants, that he can't get what he wants as a man. That isn't how life works. There might be isolated events and experiences where that does happen, but over the long haul, you're going to be better off when you serve other people with an abundance mindset as opposed to being scarce and believing that just because somebody gets theirs that you can no longer get yours. I don't believe that's the way life works. Maybe at a time and maybe in certain aspects it does. But for the most part, when I can help somebody through an introduction or have somebody on a podcast to offer to help them promote their book or their product or their service, or to jump on the call with one of my Iron Council members because they're having a hard time and walk them through whatever they're dealing with, or just be a sounding board for them. Yeah, sure, there's some investment in that, some time, some energy, some resources, but it's always going to pay dividends. I was talking with Bedros Keuilian yesterday. I've got a podcast with him coming out next week that you ought to make sure you subscribe to. And he was talking about this, just the ability to help other people, the ability to serve and lead and guide and coach and instruct. Man, it's a beautiful thing. And you'll always get what's coming to you. He used the word karma. We talked a little bit more about it, whether it's karma or the natural law of the universe, or a divine being like God, which is what I believe, it will be paid back to you tenfold when you go out to serve others. And then the last thing I would say here is community. So you've got yourself, you've got your family, you've got friends, you've got neighborhood, then you've got your business, colleagues, clients, coworkers, and then you have your community at large. What are you doing to give back? How are you serving? How are you helping law enforcement? How are you helping your other LEOs and firefighters? Are you picking up trash? Are you donating your time and money to charitable organizations that you believe in? Are you running for office, city council or mayor, things like this? If you're not, and you're more worried about what's going on at the state level or more worried about what's going on at the federal level than what you are worried about going on at the city or county level, I would say your priorities are off a little bit. I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on those things. We should, but we should also make sure that we're focusing on the smallest metric and unit possible, which is what's happening in our communities. Are you coaching sports teams? Are you giving back? Are you donating your time and money and energy? Guys, these things are so much more powerful than worrying about what's going on at the federal level. And trust me, I'm not telling you to be ignorant about it. I'm not telling you to ignore what's going on at the federal level. But I'm just suggesting to you that if we as men want to make the type of impact I believe all of us do, then we need to do it where our resources are going to be best put to use. And that's coaching your 8-year-old son's baseball team. That's mowing your neighbor's yard. That's skill acquisition and development for yourself so you can go out and serve other people. That's helping the guy who's in the cubicle next to you deal with whatever he's dealing with. Guys, we can do so much better on this. And not ironically, we'll be able to move the needle more. I'm not interested in having one guy serve 3 million or 30 million people broadly and on a shallow level. I'm interested in having 10, 30, 100 million men all serving the 5 to 10 people closest to them in a deep and significant way. And that's my call to you today, the guys who listen to this podcast, is first, share this podcast. If there's 100,000 of us listening to this podcast today, I would like this podcast to reach 1 million people next week, because that's the goal. Help as many men with the tools and resources as we can, and then they can go out and serve their families, friends, colleagues, coworkers, community members, and neighbors. Guys, we can do better. We have to do better. We can't sit by and watch this culture just slip away from us and continue to be eroded and dissolved and destructed and dismantled. The best way to do it is fix yourself and fix those closest around you. I hope that serves you. If you have other ideas on how to do this, this is a brotherhood. This is a community. So please share, connect with me, write me a DM on Instagram. And also in the meantime, guys, I've said this before, when you have something of value, we have a moral obligation to share it with those who will be positively impacted by what it is that we have. That's the Order of Man podcast, and that's the Order of Man movement. If you've ever gained any value from this, at a minimum, please leave a rating and review, because that's a grassroots movement type action where people will begin to see that you are writing a review and more people will be exposed to what we're doing. And also, I would suggest that you just take a screenshot or copy the link of this podcast, whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify or wherever you might listen, and share this with people who need to hear it. There are men, brothers, cousins, colleagues, coworkers, friends, coaches, mentors who need this information. And if we have access to it, then we have a moral responsibility to share what could positively impact somebody else's life. Please do that. Let's continue to this mission of reclaiming and restoring masculinity in a society that does not want it. But we know better, and we know what the people around us want, and it's our job to do it. All right, guys, we'll be back next week with my interview with Bedros Keuilian. Until then, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.